All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It looks like some of our co-hosts are yet to join us, but we have Mr. Mark Davis, who has joined us this evening. Um, and so we'll have some other people that will join a little bit later. I want to just take a little bit of time to go back where we left off last week. We began talking about conflict. So we want to pick up there and then add some new dimensions to that. There'll be an opportunity for people to call in a little bit later in the show, and I'll put up a link. It's a StreamYard link that you'll be able to click on and join us and share any questions or comments that you do have. So let's move on. So the premise of this group, which is primarily for men, there'll be another group that will be starting in the next couple of weeks that will focus primarily on women, and I will serve as a co-facilitator with at least one or two other people, and they will be women that will facilitate that group. So hold tight. We are putting that together, and I think that will be a wonderful platform as well. But the premise that we're working on in our conversations are talking about four things, primarily talking about mapping, which is asking the question, where are we going? Mental wellness, asking the question, how are you doing? Mediation, asking ourselves, do we consider different options? And then also mentoring, who's got your back? And what we've learned along the way is that often those are the challenges that we experience. We experience issues related to a map and what we're trying to accomplish, our mental wellness, whether or not we're stable or not, and mediation, just the options that we reviewed, and again, mentoring. Who do we talk to? Who are we following? Who's there to give us some guidance? So what's important is that we want to keep in mind to bring all of those things together. One alone is not enough to figure out this thing called life, that we need a myriad of all of those four things working simultaneously to pull it off. Another reminder of where our topics will come from is looking at ourselves as a whole person. And these are not in any priority order. They're basically the order that the graphic designer placed them in to make sense of it. But when we look at the issue of health, we're focused on being fit and trying to maximize ourselves and be healthy. Our spirituality is really asking ourselves, what do we believe in? Personal development, working on trying to thrive and expand ourselves. Our finances is what we have and potentially can give to others and share with others. Also, in our environment is where we are living and really trying to make sure that it's an environment that we can trust and brings out the best in us. Education is really asking the question of what we know, what we're seeking, what we're trying to acquire. Recreation, how we enjoy ourselves, have some fun, challenge ourselves, and family and friends who we belong to. So we'll take different topics over our weekly time together to dive into those different parts of our lives and our communities and our schedules. So that'll be where our topics come from. We'll talk about this in the future. There is a roadmap that is part of putting together a more wholesome personal plan. And we'll again talk about that in the future. But I wanted just to let people know that does exist, and we'll explain it more as time goes on. Again, the same more concise version of the 4Ms, just again listing it in a different kind of way, but that's what we're focused on. And again, it's in our family, it's in our work, it's in our relationships, it's in our communities, it's in our schools. We're looking for all of those 4Ms to be at play. The question that often is posed by the items that we'll be working on is, what causes change? And research has shown that lots of times change happens because people are wounded enough, secondarily because they realized enough, thirdly because they've been educated enough. But what I've seen the most profound change happen is because people have received enough, and they feel empowered, and they feel inspired, and their cup is full. A lot of times those other reasons of being wounded and realized and educated, the enthusiasm is there at times, but it dissipates as the time goes on. But again, when people have received enough and they feel that they're capable of doing it, that often is the best ingredient. So tonight we want to just continue our conversation about understanding conflict a little bit better. And so I'll share this, and then Mark and Dion, and I think Neil is attempting to join as well, will be able to share their thoughts with the group as well. So the first one I wanted to just go over what we went over last week is that part of the problem with conflict is that we tend to imagine a life without it, and it's always going to be there. It's not going to go anywhere, and we have to be able to understand that and accept that and embrace it. And then there are 4 parts of it. We want to, as part of our understanding and accepting it, we need to expect it, that it's going to happen. Again, going back to those 8 life domains, it's going to happen in your health, it's going to happen in your finances, it's going to happen in your family and friends. So we need to expect it, plan for it, where we can, rehearse it, think it through about what we're going to do. And conflict is not always just something challenging. It could be something good. It could be a positive step that we want to make. And again, we need to expect and plan and rehearse those, and then figure out a way to deal with it, because it's going to be there. Most likely, it's going to be a short season of dealing with the conflict, but it's going to be there. We need to figure out a way to get to the other side. And there's a battle that often goes on, is those internal conflicts we're having with inside of ourselves. And then there's those external conflicts. And at any given point, you're trying to manage that whole series of being able to keep in mind those things that you're contending with, as well as what others are contending with. But there are some things that help us to win this battle. And there are some things that help us to lose it. One of the things that helps us to win this battle is that we learn how to speak up, and we have confidence, and we learn how to share. What makes it very difficult for us to deal with conflicts is when silence, we pretend that conflict doesn't happen, and then supported also by that, we keep secrets. So if we're going to deal with any of these conflicts, we're going to need to understand that silence, and just allowing for the conflict to exist, and secrets, is not a remedy that's going to help us in the long run. When you look at all the things that are going on in our society that are challenges, they possess those 3 things. They possess a conflict, they possess silence, and they possess the element of secrets. And often, especially when a person is being victimized, often those are the things that are required. Those are the things that are insisted upon, that there's especially silence and secrets. And so we want to break this cycle with a lot of the issues that we're contending with in our lives. That's one of the first things we need to do, is to say no more silence, no more secrets. And again, as a living human being, we're going to deal with conflicts, but we're going to deal with it in a different kind of way. So what we wanted to talk about tonight that's a little different, and I want to have Mark and Dion and Neil have a chance to weigh in. And then again, I'll post it where people can join from YouTube. So you're able to share any thoughts that you have. And I'll pin that so it stays there. So if anyone wants to join at any point, they certainly can by clicking on that link in the comment tab. So I think what's important to recognize is that conflict is the end result. It is not the beginning, it's the end. And it happens because first, there is access. There is an entry point. There are privileges that are and freedoms that are exercised, and then there's a conflict or your outcome that you experience. So what's important to understand is that in a relationship, the conflict is happening because you took an opportunity to interact with that person. And then secondly, there were privileges because of the access you gave that created positive as well as challenging conflicts. But often we have to ask ourselves to look at doorway number one. Did they deserve the access? And how did they get the access? So I think that's an important piece for us to keep in mind, is that without that access, there would not be the conflict. And again, often we want to fix the conflict, but I think our reality is we need to fix the access. And then again, once they have access, is be mindful of the privileges that are given and taken that often will get us to experience the conflict that we're looking at, especially the conflict that is challenging. One more thing. So what do you do when conflict exists? So research has shown that you're not going to do better than your 5 closest friends. So choose them very, very carefully. They're going to be your platform, your foundation, your anchor. And there are generally what we find with people, there's that person who's pretty funny. They have a good sense of humor. We have another friend who has a really good sense of humility. Another friend who's really good sense of optimism. Another person who's pretty mindful and pretty thoughtful. Another person who's a great advocate and a person very eager to advance the cause of others. So generally that's what our 5 closest friends look like. But what I think is important for us is to take that research a little further and really say, what of those qualities do I possess? How are they my closest friends? And then begin to look for not a friend with each one of these qualities, one quality per friend. You want to make sure all of your friends are friendly with these 5 things. And so as a way of trying to understand it, it's understanding that humor is not the person who's the funniest person in the room, but we learn to take things with a certain lightness. We don't take everything as being serious and as fatal. Humility, and it's also, with the sense of humor, you want to just make sure that there's a lack of arrogance. Humility is the one in which you're focused on just a lightness of how you handle things. You recognize you're not any better, any worse than anyone else. And that optimism has to deal with that outlook that you have a positive outlook, that you're focused for the future. Mindfulness is that you recognize that I really want to give things a thought. I want to make sure I take advantage of the knowledge that exists. We have a winning strategy called the Library of the Unknown. And what that does is takes 2 bookcases. And the library of what we know, we realize it's pretty small. And the library of what we don't know is pretty large. And what we're trying to do is to take books from the Library of the Unknown and move them into the Library of the Known. And that's part of being mindful and having a heightened awareness. Empowerment is just recognizing we're all here for some reason. And there's a task that was assigned to us, and that is really very unique to our own lives. And taking the time to figure out what that is and what our purpose is and what our goals are, and focusing on that with a sense of firm commitment to making sure that your impact is felt now and also in the future. But those are the 5 closest friends that we want to make sure we're working on each and every day and making ourselves better people and better men, but also that we're looking for those qualities, again, as we give access to people, that those are the things we're looking for. Because when the person has access, they're going to take advantage of certain privileges that come along with those access. And if we're not careful, it's going to cause some unneeded consequences. So let me stop there and give a chance for many of my colleagues and co-hosts, Mr. Carl White, Mr. Jimmy White, Mr. Neil Francois, Mr. Dion, Mr. Mark Davis. So now we'll open it up for them to share any thoughts that they have, any questions, any comments, and then just 1 second.
Dr. Nate, I think it's interesting, when me and Carl grew up, my mom would always tell us, you don't have friends, you have associates, until they can prove that they are trustworthy, that they are supportive, that they are coming in, so that we will always keep up that barrier to say, hey, we're associated, we're connected, but it doesn't mean that you get access and favor to the resources and things that we have. So, and I think that was one of her ways of trying to tell us, hey, everybody's not cool because, they make you laugh or something like that. They got to be the complete package when you're looking for that friend.
Sure.
And I think when you take that into consideration, being able to delineate between these three aspects of conflict, access, and privilege, this takes it to the higher level. So it really lets you know that, you don't have to have a barrier up. That may have served this particular purpose, but as you go into different environments, and you begin to engage with people, places, and things, you should be able to, now that navigate between that dynamic of conflict, access, and privilege. Now, when you couple in the dynamics of the 5 closest friends, that even takes it a step further, because when you look at this dynamic and you consider that first step, which is conflict, you understand that there are internal factors and there are external factors. And when they say really worry about that which you can control, it really is insinuating to the point of being able to have a dynamic or a dichotomy, as they say, to be able to control your internal conflict, so that way you give appropriate access to the right people, places, and things, but at the same time, you increase your ability to make others have privileges, and you have access to privileges as well too. So it definitely makes sense.
Sure. And I placed up on the screen there the login information. If anyone wants to join and pose any questions or comments, you can take that StreamYard link and type it in, and we'll be able to invite you in. All right. So others, please, what are your thoughts? What's going through your mind, fellow co-host? Mr. Dion?
So when I think about the 5 closest friends should be, I always think that I have these characters instilled in me. And so when I'm going around different groups of people, like our interactions, I always look for all 5 of these, how they laugh at stuff, how they look at how things are said, and what their ideas are on our different conversations I'm in. And I'm glad that you're talking about this, because it's really important when it comes to your surroundings, and who you surround yourself around. In your environment, especially, you should look for all 5 of these qualities within yourself and like who you surround yourself with.
Good, very good. Thanks for sharing, Dion. Mr. Davis, Mark Davis.
Yes, I think it's interesting how, let me start it this way. I was with my grandson this weekend, and I took him to the playground. At the playground, he befriended or ran into another kid who had monster trucks. And so the conflict came because my grandson didn't have his monster truck, and the other little boy did. And so the other little boy wasn't willing to share the monster trucks with my grandson. And so it kind of hurt his feelings. I could see the dejection on his face. He's not able to really vocalize just yet or talk as smoothly as I do. So he couldn't negotiate. But it's interesting to see how the young ones deal with the conflict and how they learn and how they develop through their lifetime, and how we can teach them how to deal with those type of conflicts, and come out positive, or be able to associate with the 5 closest friends and develop those 5 closest friends. That's what's going through my mind.
Good. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Any thoughts or comments that you want to share?
And I think when you really take a look at the current events that you see, not just Philadelphia struggle with, but a lot of other cities struggle with, it's all attributed to this dynamic of conflict, and access to different resources and privileges or the lack thereof. So when you look at it from a solution standpoint, and really see how much of a challenge conflict is for society, or better yet, the few opportunities we have to learn about conflict, not just from a male's perspective, but just from a family and a society perspective, you can begin to see how just something as simple as the 5 closest friends makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Mr. Neal, anything you want to share?
When you talk about conflict, I used to find myself running towards conflict, meaning like if a button was pushed with me, I used to go to 10 real quick.
Mm.
But now I avoid conflict. I really don't want no issues with nobody. I don't know if that's good,
Mm-hmm.
but I go in the other direction now. When I used to try to take it on head on, but I'm in the point in my life right now. I just don't want no issues. I really don't. And when it comes to the 5 friends situation, I used to always want to be with friends, but I'm at the point right now. I go to work and my friends is my family. That's what I enjoy the most.
Mm. Okay. Well, I think that you bring up a good point there, Neal, in the sense that what's important is that we find some sort of balance, and we understand the importance of, it's not that you want to be, overly friendly with everybody, and it's not that you just want to have the assigned people to your life, and that's what family members are, is they're the assigned, and often our friends are our chosen. And I think our job is to understand the most powerful word in the English language is the word "and." We live in a society that often encourages us to choose the blue car or the red car. If someone came down the street with a half blue car and a half red car, we'd look at them like they're crazy. But really, that's what life should be about. It's about us making a sense of the "and." In our situations, we're fathers and husbands and brothers and uncles, and we have to find a way to do honor to all of those different roles. It's not, any of them are just our sole responsibility. So I would encourage you, Neal, to try to strike that balance. And often when we experience things, we allow for that pendulum to swing so far back, and we lose a lot. Because we begin to isolate ourselves. And again, there is not everybody should have the opportunity to have access to you. But I think it's important that more than just your family has that access, and so they can enjoy those privileges. But you're right. I think as we get older, we learn to protect ourselves because we've gone through a lot, we've seen a lot, but we have to avoid isolation. One of the things that they've learned by looking at people who age is that isolation often takes away several years of a person's life, as opposed to being involved in other activities. That isolation tends to affect our ability to live a long life. So we want to be just mindful of that, and make some choices that increase the probability of happiness and success, especially into the future. Other thoughts, other comments that anyone has?
Dr. Williams, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Who was that?
I was just going to ask, is conflict always the end result, or it's always the end result?
Yes. Well, because the only people that don't have conflict are dead people. So conflict is the end result, because that's but I also want you to take conflict in a very general sense. It's not always negative. So conflict is you reaching for a doorknob and having to turn the doorknob to get out. That's a moment of conflict. The door is in one state and you're trying to move into another state, and if you're not careful, you'll pull the doorknob off. So again, it doesn't have to be always something that's a negative situation. It could be just the way things are, but just learning to understand that and accept that again, if you're living, you're going to enjoy conflicts, and that's gonna, but again, you wouldn't have the conflict if you didn't have the access and exercise privileges. So, often if we don't like, some of the conflicts we have to deal with, the way we begin to address that is going back to looking at the access that got us there, and recognizing that may be where the challenge comes in. And again, the privileges. So again, looking at what, looking at relationships, it wasn't that they had access to was the sole problem. It was the privileges that they took that created the conflict. So just being in proximity often is not enough. And I think why that's important is because often we don't want to look at it in that kind of way. We tend to not want to examine it from all the different dimensions. And what's important if you're going to fix something is you have to know what to call it. And you have to have taken the time to really examine that. All right. So thank you, Dr. Hilton, for sharing that. And his question is, before we go back to Carl, is how do we encourage people to exercise responsibility with their privileges? And it's going back to what we had said earlier. It's by speaking and encouraging confidence and sharing, as opposed to being in silence and keeping secrets. So you've heard people say before, you got to teach people how to treat you. You can't do that without having some conversations with them. So I think that's the piece, is you got to break the silence. And again, whenever you look at any problem, and I challenge any person to look at any problem where those are not the ingredients, that our society, as Carl said earlier, with the issues we're dealing with, they all lean on, depend on, and have as the fuel silence and secrets. And then often that's part of the conflict that people are experiencing. So we want to solve a problem and be responsible with the privileges. Let's talk about it. Let's bring it to the table and have that courageous conversation. And it's the courage to talk, but it's also the courage to listen. So often a courageous conversation it's depicted as being one-sided, but it's really two-sided. And from the standpoint is there are going to be moments where you're listening, moments where you're talking. The courage is that we provide a platform where both of those things are happening. So thank you, Dr. Hilton, for sharing that question. I think, Carl, you had something you wanted. Oh, there we got him back again. And then, so I'm sorry, you're going to say something?
Just the point that you made about conflict and how to look at it, very loosely, both positive and challenge. I think it's an important part to understand. And then the other point, when I forgot the gentleman that may have been talked about the point about balance and how oftentimes we assume that balance is 50-50, but it can be 80-20, 70-30, 90-10. So just being able to have that ability to have the understanding of looking at things from a perspective of trying to mitigate as much conflict as you possibly can. And that often comes from just having the access to information and then sharing that information and not being silent, as you pointed about earlier. But just that dynamic of balance, and then the point about everything is and not or. So those many different roles that we have to assume on a daily basis, I can begin to see how it leads one on that pathway of conflict, access, and privilege. But just again, to have the point to go back to the 5 closest friends is something that will always be able to carry a person through. So,
I think your call, I think your point is so important to underline that we live in a society that makes it sound like there's going to be an equal, equation between things, and reality is that lots of times that's just not that's not the case, and someone is going to be in a situation where they're going to be more of the helper than the helpee, and at different times of the day, and at different times of the week, and at different times of the month, that'll be the case, and we just got to be prepared for that, and just recognize that that's just par for the cause. So we have a little different situation tonight. This is a men's group, but we have one of my dear friends and colleagues, Miss Tina Garrett, who has infiltrated our men's group. So let's allow Tina to join us and just hear what she has to say.
Thanks, guys, for allowing me to infiltrate your men's group. But I received some great information, which now that I'll be empowered. Thank you, Dr. Williams. And just for understanding that conflict is not always challenging. So I was struggling with that a little bit. But just knowing to have the confidence when I come up against the conflict, to use and keep my 5 closest friends close when I'm dealing with it. So thank you, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. And Tina, just a question for you. When you look at some of the things that we're covering this evening, how do you see this having any, if all, any impact on that? So when you think about more so this access and privileges, and you look at it through that lens of really, suggesting that you look at how did they get so close to you? And again, how did they get the opportunity to exercise those privileges? So when you begin to think about that, Tina, what goes through your mind as you
just being so easily to be drawn into conflict. So that makes me just take a look and step back for myself, that I shouldn't just be so eager to jump right in because it came at me. If it's negative conflict, if I can say,
sure.
Not just so easily drawn in. If you understand what I'm saying.
I do. And one of the things I try to remind people is your emergency ain't mine.
Right.
So often we let people, come in and have access to us, and we give them that sense that their emergency is ours, and that's a privilege you're giving them, and I think we should be mindful of that privilege. So we have two other co-hosts that have joined us, Mr. Halston and Mr. Meeks. And Mr. Meeks, we've been just taking our conversation we had last week about conflict a little further, and really asking people to look at the access that's given, that access point, and the privileges that often people have taken advantage of, that has resulted in the conflict. But often we have to do a better job of being gatekeepers of ourselves and others. And especially for those of us that have others that we're responsible for, and that we're in a position of leadership and stewardship, is that we need to be mindful of the access point, because often once they're in, it's hard to get rid of them. And again, once privileges are exercised, it's hard to unexercise them. And again, once the conflict happens, it's often, it can't be unseen and it can't be unexperienced. It's going to be there for a long time. So Mr. Meeks, any comments or thoughts that you may want to share on any of those things we covered?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Doctor. Thank you. Excuse my tardiness. Yes.
Sorry. Oops.
Back
Sorry.
to our my fave 5, I like to say, my favorite 5 friends that I communicate on a regular basis. It's very important to know that these are the people that I think about. These are the people that are in my prayers when I pray for their families. I think that you're absolutely right. When you give people access, now they're pulling at your energy. I like to say, and it's very important that we conserve our energy, especially the older we get. that we give. We allow people, when I talk to my students, I say, I can give 1 minute to 100 students or 100 minutes to one student. So it all depends on what I'm putting my energy into. But just having that access to the Fave Five friends, usually and probably I'm the godfather of their children as well. So it creates a branch of connection that I have to tie into and hold on to. And when we think about conflict, I always think of, we talked about it last week with the negative conflict and positive conflict, and it being using my intellect and also lessening my emotions when it comes to conflict, so I can deal with it better, deal with it a little more different.
So let me ask you a question, Mr. Meeks. We had a chance to talk last week, and again, we began broaching the concept of conflict and how to deal with it. Did any of that carry over? Did you see it have any impact on your last 7 days and how you looked at things, experienced them? If you don't mind sharing, and I'd like for others to chime in if there's anything that was, because my goal is to try to develop things that walk with people, that it's not just theoretical, it's real, it's practical, and that it has an impact in what happens after that. So if you can share, Mr. Meeks.
Yes, everything that and it happens all the time. Every time we come out of a meeting, the examples present themselves because we're more aware now. So with my awareness, some things came about where I lost a friend of mine about 8 months ago. And it was to the point where I understood the relationship that I had with him before he passed away. But the relationship with the family was something that I loved. I loved the fact that I was able to have a relationship with him and his family. But since he passed away, that kind of went in another direction where the language changed. So if it was when I converse with him, I say, "Hey, how you doing?" And he says, "My wife is here." And I say, "Hey, baby, how you doing?" And now that he's gone, that baby sounds like I'm flirting. So this is, one of the things that presents itself when you're like, hold on, that's not the direction I was headed. Where I was going was where we were before, this gentleman passed away. My best friend passed away, but the language changed because we're in an emotional state right now. And we have to, so what I did was I took a couple steps back. I looked at it from a broader perspective. I looked at it from her viewpoint, but I also looked at it from my viewpoint and said, what do I need to do to have a better result with this conflict?
Right. And I think you really bring up a good point there. It's the access and the privileges. If you manage those, you can avoid the conflict. And again, you had access. You're the best friend of her former husband, and there are certain privileges. But again, you're recognizing, as you shared, I may not be able to exercise them the way I used to. So again, by doing that, you're now stumping and stopping the conflict from happening. So I think that's real deal. That's real life. And I think that it's helpful for others to hear. This is how you just recognizing the landscape changes. I was kidding around with someone earlier today, and often we choose our people that we love, especially our intimate people, based on how they look. My advice to people is go find their grandmother and look at her and see if you find her appealing, because that's what she's going to look like in the future. And so again, I think that we think everything is static and things won't change, and we got to be mindful that they will, and we will change too. We're not the same specimens we were back in the day as well. But again, we just forget that things change. And as you said, Mr. Meek, we got to be responsive to that change and respectful of that change, because it's going to life is going to require that. So again, thank you for sharing that. Anyone else with any thoughts or comments on anything we've covered so far? Questions?
For me, the conflict being a positive instead of a negative all the time is a good takeaway.
Mark, your mic is hard to hear, so I'm not sure where your microphone is in relation to you, but if you could just make that a little closer, that's good. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, for me, the takeaway is the consequence always doesn't have to be a negative consequence. And even if it starts out negative, you could always turn it into a positive learning moment.
Very good. Very good. So, any other thoughts before I pose another question about our future and what we want to talk about going forth? So I want to make sure that our time is relevant and useful to us and those that will watch it in the future. So what do you think are some of the other, again, I shared with you, and I'll put back up on the screen. Sorry. We could take any of these topics about that are part of the whole person. We could talk about something related to health, and we can also bring people in to join us. We could talk about spirituality, personal development, managing environments, finances, education, recreation. We've talked a little bit tonight about conflict among family and friends. But what, if anything, is a topic out of this list or just in general that you feel you want to have us talk about in the near future?
So for me, I want to talk about like the decisions that people can make in certain forms of conflict. Or like this past week, I was at the basketball court with my friends. I still go out to the basketball court and get runs in and whatnot. And so we're waiting to go down to the court, and this car pulls up looking for a bag that he lost or whatever that has valuables in it to him. And we don't know nothing about it because we literally just getting there. And so that's what we're trying to explain to him. And he was like, so if y'all can find it, y'all let us know. And so we're all like, okay, sure, we'll let you know. But we didn't think about getting his contact information because we're never going to find his bag that you lose at a park. You know what I mean? So he was like, so how you going to let me know if you find it if you never got my information? And so we like, oh, you're right. So let's get your Instagram or something that we can contact you with. So he's stuttering and it's like, upset because he lost something that is valuable to him, obviously. And he's doing whatever to get it back. So he tries to read out his Instagram name, can't get it right. Just off the nerves, we couldn't spell it right or whatever. And so I chose to walk down and like give him my phone so he could put it in my Instagram and make it simple and resolve the conflict to get him out of there because he wasn't on any good intentions. But he was looking for this bag. And it's a bunch of my friends, and I don't know where their thought process was at, but I just wanted to resolve the conflict the best way I know possible. That's just talking it out and like giving the person whatever they want, to make the situation go away. And I just want to bring that up because in another decision, if we didn't all just stood there froze, you never know what could happen. And then for him, the decision to even come out as hostile as he chose to on a group of random individuals, as a group of men, that could have went so many different ways. So I just wanted to bring that to the table. Like your decisions really do matter in split seconds or what you're prepared for, but it was random. That was not practiced or anything like that.
Right. So it's those choices that we make and those decisions that we make. And how do we get to those? And again, as you said, Dion, it happens so quickly. Having that ability in the moment is so very important. So I think that's a really good topic for us to talk about is those decisions. And, we have a scorecard called In the Moment scorecard, and it's really looking at what happens in that moment. And it's when that surprise happens, how do we deal with surprises? I was one time in a church and the electricity went off. And this was a church with no windows. And the pastor said not too nice word because he was surprised by the lights going out. So often that's the true moment. Is when the lights go out and you didn't expect them. Again, we'll definitely take that, and barring any other ideas, we'll definitely take some time to dive into that next week about decisions and choices. Other thoughts, comments? I see Mr. Meeks, you're nodding your head in agreement.
Yes, that was a great example. I was going to say before Dion spoke, the environment. I mean, we're in a world where people are hostile. People are quick to blow up for any apparent reason, but it has a lot to do with something that they're going through. It could be bio, it could be where they got from their, parents and their parents. It could be psycho. It could be what they're creating and the seeds that they're planting, or it could be social. And a lot of the stuff that's going on right now in our society is what we're watching, what we're tuning into, what we're focused on. So I think that the environment is something that I would like to tap into a little more.
Very good. All right. Anyone else with any thoughts about future topics, things that are on your mind, that you're wanting us to make sure we touch on?
If I can, I'm a guest. I like the access, allowing the access. That's hard for me when people come at you in conflict, and how do you shut that down? So that's what I want to talk about.
Right. I think that's a really good point, and I'm just trying to see if there's some sort of symmetry between this access, the environment, decisions and choices, and like how do you navigate some of those? Again, sometimes those things are assigned to you, and sometimes they're your choice. And is there a difference with how you deal with the coworker you have to work with versus the basketball team you may have signed up to join? But I think Dion brings a good point. Well, what happens when someone comes into the basketball team who wasn't part of the original group, and how do you deal with that? And because often that's where the challenge comes. That's where the conflict comes in. And I think the other piece that I think is also important for us to spend some time talking about is that these decisions, as Dion was talking about, can be made in 30 seconds, but it's going to possibly affect the next 30 plus years of your life. So if we're not careful in sizing it up and recognizing another person's agenda, your own agenda, and again, going back to, you're in a car and, someone cuts you off, and this person takes it, to a whole, goes from 0 to 100. And now there's a gun. Like, where did that come from? It's just, a simple circumstance, but now it's taken to a whole new level. But again, just recognizing how did we get there? And how do we have that access? So we're in that circumstances, but some of those we can control, and others, how do we respond to that? But again, a lot of it has to deal with rehearsing, and it's part of training your brain. So it's like an emergency room doctor is able to do that kind of work because their brain is trained to look at severed limbs and to look at blood and to look at totally different than the average person. So that kind of stuff does not scare them, that does not make them emotional, does not make them cry, because they've trained their brain through a lot of years of work, right, to be able to deal with that. It's a firefighter going into a building that's on fire. We would I'm out of here, put some water on it and call it a day, but they're going in there. So many of them went into the World Trade Center. So how do they, again, it's their training. It's what their mission in life is. And they understand it comes with a certain amount of risk. So we'll definitely spend some time talking about that, because I think it's real. Any other thoughts? Any other comments?
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Neal.
Do you think that people are a product of their environment? Meaning if I live in a hostile environment, I'm going to be hostile, or if I live in the suburbs, I'll be more calm, maybe.
There's no question, and again, it goes back to that training of the brain. There's a lot of research, especially on children, looking at some of the things that they've had experience early in their life. You know, I talk about in the work that we do about challenging life events and its impact. So there's no question that it has an impact, but there's also a role that personalities play. You can take the same situation with one sibling that they experience and another sibling they experience the same situation, but their response to it is totally different. So it's not only the environment, it's what makes them up as a person, and it's their personality. And I think often we put more weight into the environment than into personality development to deal with that environment. And so I think we tend to think that it's about money and resources, but reality is the homework assignment is for us, especially for those of us that are parenting, is to figure out how do we help that person bring out the best person that they are and their coping mechanisms and their strategies. So again, it's easy to say that the environment helped or didn't help, but you've gotten some of our strongest people in our society came from environments that were very difficult. And we've had people that came from environments that are highly resourced and have been, have been just the opposite of that. So it's more than that. And I think often we don't recognize that a person is the composite of their family's DNA. And so reality is, I think often we forget about that it's not just mommy and daddy that is in the mix of this person. There's a lot of other contributing factors. And that's why a lot of times you'll see where people have affinities for one, grandparents or aunts or uncles, because they have a great affinity for their uncle, but that's not their father. But they have a greater affinity for the uncle because the personalities. So I think often we don't recognize we come from a pool, not from a spot. And it's our job is to try to help people figure out how do we, manage that and encourage that understanding that every person's different. And I also try to remind people about those 10 fingers. None of them match yourself. None of your 10 fingers match them yourself. And they don't match anybody else, anywhere else in the world. That's a lot of work. I don't know who our maker may be. It's different for different people. But he or she put in a lot of work to make 10 fingers and toes that don't match each other, and they don't match anybody else in the world. I think there was a memo given that we often just don't realize and we just don't accept. And again, my wife and I, we have twins. One's a boy, one's a girl. Originally, the plan was the girl was coming first, the boy was coming second, until the girl decided to push the boy into the position where he came out first and then she came out second. And so even though they're twins, they do not have the same birth minute. And again, that's just a reminder, a memo to ourselves. Each person is different and unique, and we need to figure out what was the reason that they are here. What is their contribution? Again, we'll continue to keep working on this. You guys and gals have given us, have given us some homework. We'll get started on it. So any closing thoughts from our co-hosts that you want to share as we get ready to wrap up for this week? Anything you want to take away, say, speak now?
Very fruitful conversation, Dr. Williams.
Yeah, very much. And I thank my outstanding co-host for it was pretty bad at the beginning here. We started and there was like Mark and I. So I'm so glad the rest of you came along before the night was out. So thank you for showing up and showing out. All right, without further ado, I'll let you guys go. I'll be back here next Monday at 8 p.m. And again, talking about some of these topics of decisions, choices, the environment, and access. Thanks. Take care.
Take care. Thanks.